Hi. To be perfectly honest, I've been a little apprehensive about continuing on my YouTube channel. I'm just not the best public speaker, and editing videos has been difficult because of that. Um, I haven't been the best at making content on a digital video platform. Um, but I still enjoyed hosting my videos on YouTube, so I thought I'd try something in more of a podcast-oriented direction. Um, With that aside, what I wanted to talk about today, just off the top of my head, really was Fallout 4. And more specifically, a video I saw about Fallout 4 from a video essayist about why Cait is the most realistic depiction of a drug addict in a video game. And if I'm going to be honest, when I first saw this video, I think I was really into the idea of it, really into the idea of looking at a game that a lot of people had discredited and seeing what silver linings there may have been. But upon reflection, I'm not sure I have the same stance anymore. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about. And I guess part of what I wanted to talk about was the word realistic, I guess, is what um, banged around in my head a lot because I guess when I think of realistic, the first thing that sprung to my mind was how I didn't feel like I had any experiences that really helped me relate to Cait on many levels at all. And that seemed strange to me as somebody who has been dealing with drug addiction for a number of years now. And I sort of put off making this video um, when I reflected upon the fact that, the world of Fallout is a much crueler place than we could ever really know as people. If anything like that had really come to fruition, I don't think any of us could really comprehend the abject physical and existential horror that living in an irradiated, monster filled paranoid driven society like Fallout would be. A place where your neighbors could be replaced by robots or eaten by monsters, actual monsters. A place where your kid asks you to check for monsters in the closet and you might have to worry that there might actually be one in there. I don't think any of us have that sort of scope, I guess. Not many of us have even the slightest idea of what something like that would even be like. But neither do the writers to an extent, right? Like nobody's really living in a world like that. We use our imagination. That's kind of the point of these games. That's kind of the point of fantasy and sci-fi to begin with, right? Is imagining what people would be like in different circumstances. For me, great sci-fi and fantasy has always been like, what would we as people really be like in a fantastical environment? In other words, realism for me, the key to realism is in the people themselves. Um, and how they react to the environment. It's not so much about it hasn't always been so much for me about making them fantastical. And I think I've been seeing a trend where a lot of other writers are trying to go this way, and I think a lot of people are leaning more towards seeing something a little bit more within the realms of realistic characters and people within a fantastical environment rather than like fantastical characters. Um, and I guess maybe the first example that comes to the top of my mind is how like Batman for the newer films has been a much more grounded character than he was in the days of Tim Burton or even in the Christopher Nolan movies, really the kinds of things he could pull off and the kind of technology he could acquire. Um Batman has sort of been like growing more and more grounded as a character. Um, but I guess in spite of all that, um, the question I had was about Cait. And I guess first and foremost, I'm going to start with the thing that bugs me the most about the video, and it's something that the original poster was not unaware of, to give them credit. The biggest fault in Cait's writing as a story about addiction is that she could find a magical, fantastical machine that could sort of just almost instantly cure her addiction. Where in reality, with drug addiction, overcoming it, medication is very important, but there's a balance between medication and therapy and understanding what drove you to do things in the first place. There's self-reflection. And I guess the recovery chair is really what um my whole fascination around Cait as a character and as a realistic depiction really lies, because you have this element that's obviously very fantastical to a large degree. This magical chair that can just rid you of all the chemical and physical and mental dependencies that you have on a substance. And theoretically, it seems even erase some of that from your mind, as it seems to do with Cait. With some of the dialogue she gives about the sort of rush being gone from her, even though she presumably wasn't using while she was in the vault. Um, it just sort of fascinated me because it's like, well, what do I do with this piece of storytelling where it's like you have a radical departure from reality, and it seems to serve more the game than the idea of the narrative. It seems to serve the game, in fact, at the expense of the narrative, which is depicting um, a character with a drug addiction. And like I said, I can't entirely relate to the experiences of Cait just because I've had my own addictions, because I've never been in a state that low before. Um, I still found myself fascinated by the question. I Being a little bit more charitable, one could read the chair as sort of a metaphor for getting sober, especially in highlights to the dialogue Cait gives about the chair, how she is worried that once the drugs are cleared out of her system, and when she goes to sobriety, that there will be nothing to sort of hold back the thoughts she once had about her past and her traumas, and that she might not be able to move past them or operate without the substances, as many addicts fear when they consider the possibilities of sobriety. So, in that context, the chair wouldn't necessarily be all about the quick fix it provides in the game, but about the idea of you and Cait fighting for her sobriety and taking sort of the long road it takes to get there through the vault. Even then, I'm not entirely sure that I do like the chair, because it sort of contextualizes the journey of drug addiction to addiction to sobriety on a sort of straight line, or even a curved plot where things might climax and get out of control with what's typically referred to as like the jackbox moment, or the jackpot moment, excuse me, where things sort of spiral into a head where you can't continue anymore, and then sort of find yourself in sobriety. Um, and sobriety is always the thing that sort of like comes after. And I guess what I thought to myself is that if that was really how sobriety sort of works itself into the journey of somebody who is addicted. Because truthfully, well, part of it is the simple fact that most people who are drug addicts don't try sobriety for a while and then find themselves over with that part of their life. It's normally a reoccurring process of sobriety and addiction through these sort of cycles. My own experience has been one of trying to escape anxiety and depression, but for the most part, it's felt like an escape from numbness, from this gray sort of area that we find ourselves in a lot of the time with our life when nothing exciting is going on at all, whether good or bad. And we just sort of like sit there and wonder where things are supposed to go. It's sort of what brings me to using in the quiet moments of the day when I'm alone, and it's what's built up in me when I've been alone and sober for a long time. It's what brought me to use again. So it just sort of got me wondering about what it really means to have a relationship between sobriety and using, and if we're just trying to create we're just trying to replace one escape with another one, trying to escape the exciting in life to just sort of embrace this dull timidness in hopes that the highs and lows of the past that have been like our drug use will just sort of bring us back down again. And I think about this, and I'm not really sure where to place someone like Cait. Telling the story of a drug addict in a video game like Fallout 4 comes with its own downsides. You can't take the years of just cycles and dependencies and sort of condense it into a neat story without having some drawbacks. There are obvious things that I really like about the storyline. Just this idea of the nuance of Cait not wanting to fully embrace becoming sober when she stares dead in the eyes the possibility that this machine can actually make her sober. Her worries that she won't be able to handle her past or sort of move on from them once she's forced to confront them sober. I do like the fact that they depict it as an addiction, obviously, as something that um, just physically debilitates somebody. I like the fact that Cait stumbles over her words many times, that she's so sarcastic, and that she is so terrified to open up to people about anything, that she's sort of guessing what people are going to say and preparing for the worst in a lot of circumstances. There's a lot of cohesion in her character that makes her sort of make sense in the world. And I guess what I'm sort of left with at this point is if that's enough, if this in its total package is a representation, I think does this sort of condition justice. And how good of a representation it needs to be, what it's ultimately serving. And I assumed going into this video that I'd have a lot more problems than I did, and it's left me this sort of empty feeling like, you can just sort of look at the stages of Cait and just sort of understand this phenomena, and that it's just so cut and dry to some extent that these questions that Cait brings up about doubt, about worry, these constant cycles in her head that she's sort of used to justify taking the drugs she's taken, as if they really mean anything when the game works so hard to give you, the player, such simple options to deal with it. And I think back to all the advice I've been given that really hasn't amounted to much for me. Um, and I wonder where I'm going to, I guess. The other insight I might be able to provide on some level that might be a little bit more difficult to talk about, I guess, would be the specifics of the drugs that Cait takes within the game itself. Within the world of Fallout, there's a drug called Psycho, and it seems to operate a lot based on the ways of how we understand drugs like PCP and other dissociatives. And while I haven't taken PCP, I've taken dissociative class drugs before in an effort to sort of disassociate myself f- from not only sort of my past events, but from myself as well. When I not only didn't like the things I did or the things I experienced, but the person I was, feeling like a person at all, even was a constant commitment. It was something that I felt limited me to understanding the world around me. So I chugged cough syrup to escape that. If it isn't obvious, I wouldn't recommend anybody chug cough syrup or try DXM to try and disassociate from themselves because I felt like I was going to die. I felt paranoid and I felt like there was sort of no end to this crippling sense of doom that was going to loom over me at any moment. And I felt every time I took it that I needed to quit. A lot of what brought me to sobriety in the first place has been bad DXM trips that have made me question what I'm doing and made me want to escape. And I can't name you specifically times I've been able to quit without first taking the step from marijuana and lighter drug use to dissociative dextromethorphan. It's not really the end of the world. The kind of life I live, the kind of opportunities and chances I get. But when you're a drug addict, you can blow anything out of proportion, really. Everything can feel like the end of the world. Because the world has already ended. As far as you're concerned in that moment, using again, not using, really what that means usually is in between using. I've had this thought that I don't know if I ever experienced true sobriety. A month or so of sobriety, month or two, I want to say, in between these past 4 years, is the longest one stretch of time I can recall being sober. And I just sort of let it go after a while. I let go of the idea entirely. I let go of the idea that I was in need of fixing or that I was somebody who was fixed, like I was some sort of monument ready to be carved out. If I could just get myself sober and work up to it slowly, I could chisel out that stone statue and see myself come to completion. and I was tired. I was really tired. I was just waiting for that to happen, I guess. And I just kept using, and life kind of felt like a game. So I think really a game about the end of the world is a pretty damn good place to place a character like Cait. When I used dissociative drugs, I lost hours of time. I would lose hours of time in a day. I would feel this sort of sick feeling that I got after taking it. I would look up at the sky and wait with this sort of grand anticipation while I waited for the effects to come up. And sometimes they would, and sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes I'd just take more until I felt something, anything. But I was already at this sort of numbed state where I was already sort of there. You take a little bit and you're already on the train. You can already feel it moving. So you just take a little bit more and wait for it to sort of take off. I didn't expect to go here today, honestly. I really was just interested in the chair and discussing what Cait meant as a character rather than myself. I thought I had some insight into Cait from my own lived experiences. But more often than not, I think with art, um, we tend to like sort of ignore the fact that art can, I don't know, man. Cait gave me more insight into myself, and I want to look at that and shed a tear and find sobriety, but I don't know. I'm probably gonna get high after I make this just to get rid of the stress. Stop thinking about DXM and just do weed again so that I can relax and listen to music and just drift off into my own little world. It's why I really played games in the first place and played RPGs that spanned hours and hours of time away from all my projects and all my problems so I could just live a different sort of life and not question so much how to do things, but just do them and just see something, anything getting built really that I could look upon and think that I made myself. I could absorb myself into the world that I inhabited instead. Because out here, I'm so selfish. My desires are so selfish and self-centered, and in there, it's just how things are. I ran out of things to say a while ago, but this video is getting pretty long, and I think I said my piece. Thank you.